souls, our collective soul, our God, our source, our universe, our higher beings, they're saying, are inviting us to be very attentive to the languaging that we're using. The words and the conversations we're having with ourselves, which we've talked about this a lot of times with Awaken Superhuman, and then teaching and offering tools to help re-guide this. But right now, the invitation is like, what is the languaging that you're using? So I did a podcast interview today, and one of the languagings that I shared with him, and also I did it with the parents call as well, is that interesting is a word that I use often. So instead of like, oh, this is good or bad, this is awful, or this is intense, or this is like great, I like to use interesting, especially if somebody's telling a story or if things are happening or unfolding. I like to use interesting. And part of what they said, the being said, is that it helps trigger a part of our brain, a part of our subconscious that keeps us open enough for resourcefulness to take over, for something greater to take over. And in the podcast, they talked about it being like a portal. So when we use even the word interesting within your languaging, instead of judging or labeling something, you stay open enough for something greater to unfold, right? For the truth to better reveal itself outside of our own limitations and expectations that we have for ourselves, for life, and from others. So again, something as simple as that is using interesting versus labeling or identifying an emotion to a specific situation or something that's happening in front of you. It keeps you open. Thank you. It keeps you open and receptive to being more available to source itself moving through you. And as a coach, so there's a lot of people, but there might be several coaches that are listening. Even you working with your client, doctors or teachers, like even using that languaging with the people you work with opens them up to receive greater rewards. Greater rewards to whatever it is you're delivering, or greater rewards for them to see the gift of whatever circumstances they're moving through. Another thing they brought up with the kids in the kids call is that they talked about the idea of feeling off. And I talked about how there's a lot of circles, which I think it has its place in parenting. Like, if you see, especially the young ones, right, they're going through a fit, they're having a moment, right? It's like, oh, I can tell that you're angry. I can tell you're upset, or I can tell you're sad. And what the beings and angels were telling the parents was that, energy's moving to this. What the being said to the parents, and this is applicable to us as adults, is that they were encouraging parents to see these situations and moments as an opportunity to help them say to their child, I can tell you're feeling off, right? Which is a wonderful sentence to use with partners, with children, with clients, with even yourself. Like when emotions are off, you're feeling off, right? There's a part of you that is not feeling centered. There's a part of you that is not feeling home. There's a part of you that's not feeling aligned. There's a part of you that's not feeling peace. You're feeling off. I can tell, thank you, they're correcting me. It seems that you're feeling off, or I can tell you're feeling off. Would you like to talk about it? And even just having that offered to our, like if you offer that to yourself, there's a part of you that is helping you lean into the beautiful navigating system that we have within ourselves. Our emotions are not who we are, right? Our emotions are a guiding post into what we are liking and what we're not, right? And then depending on the circumstances and what's unfolding in front of us, depending on the perceiver, is going to be judged in a different way. Right? Because the situation for me, I might see it as delicious when someone else might see the situation for whatever reason it may be, and they may not see that as something that's positive. Right? So it's like that phrase and the eye of the beholder, right? It's like it's based on the person, and even in quantum physics, right? The idea that things respond based on the observer, right? There's research on that as well. So it's the whole conversation that they're inviting here is that even just looking at yourself and others like, oh, it seems like you're off, or my hallucination is that you're off. just by having that conversation with yourself and with others and your children, it brings people indirectly back to a place of acknowledgement, like your navigation system is telling you something. So for those of you who felt the energies that were moving in the last week and in the next coming weeks are telling me, and that's interesting. It's not good or bad, it's interesting. What you're being invited to do is just to be mindful and attentive and noticing your navigating system. The navigating system is a beautiful tool that we've been blessed with for the soul to communicate with the human self. Unfortunately, though, especially in our childhood, for a lot of us, and into adulthood, and also in adulthood, we've used labels to judge, to distort, to give, put walls around circumstances or even triggers and emotions that we're having by labeling it as good or bad, right? Not good enough, good enough. Thank you. And we've attached so many stories around different emotions. And like they identified in the podcast interview, it's like if something happens, right, and you were like, oh, this is horrible, or this is bad, or I'm angry, what happens subconsciously or based on what they're saying, subconsciously is like it becomes a train wreck, right? So everything and anything that has been in your history that you've associated or linked with the idea of angry or sad or depressed, all those things that have been linked to that become part of the conversation, become part of the thought. And it doesn't mean that they're obvious and clear where your human mind is like, oh yes, this when I was 10, this when I was 20, this when I was 85, if you're 90, right? It's like stories and things that are part of the history and the past that are not really relevant to the moment itself, but because it's being attached to the emotion, subconsciously you are telling your brain, your human mind to pick up a fragment of that history and bring it into the now. There's value in identifying emotions. So I'm not in any way saying don't honor the emotions or look at your emotions, but also understand that the reality is this includes me and includes you and includes most of us humans, that there has been a mislabel to our navigating system way too often and way more than we realize. Another example they gave in the parent call, energy's moving to that, in the parent call is, and this is, I'm not quite sure why they're wanting this example, but that's the vision they're giving me. So this has happened a few times while I'm driving and a person cuts me off or something happens, right? So what I've done in the past is I either laugh because I think it's funny that certain things happen, or when somebody gets upset with me, I just think it's funny. So I laugh, right? That's one thing I do. Another thing that can happen is that I just like, whatever, I'm just not going to let that, like, I just don't give it the energy and the attention because I love myself enough and my moment enough that it's not worth my energy nor my time. But there's been times where my little one is in the car and he's like, aren't you going to honk at them? Like, that's not okay. Like, what's wrong? Like he's heard that from someone, right? Or maybe witnessed it or saw it on TV, who knows? And one thing I share with him and I remind him, I'm like, I could do that, but I'm choosing to feel happy right now. I'm choosing to decide that I'm not going to let that get to me, right? So I'm choosing what I interpret from that experience. They're giving me that example because it's a very simple example to once again go back into the conversation of things that have happened in our past or maybe we've seen from other people and the stories, the labels, the emotions we've attached to that experience. So again, I trust most of you don't get triggered by crazy drivers. I've been a crazy driver and I'm sure you have too. So it's an example, right? So I'm claiming that most of you don't get triggered by crazy drivers. But if you do get triggered by crazy drivers, it's something to look at. That's interesting. Because it's not even majority of the time, thank you. It's not about that moment itself, but it's the history that's attached to that idea of this is the emotion you should have when someone cuts you off. But it's interesting because that can also come up in conversation. If you feel that the person you're talking to is cutting you off or has interrupted you, right? For majority of people, it's like, this person's being rude. So it can trigger discomfort, annoyance, frustration, anger, and a whole array of emotions that may not feel good. But again, it could be more connected with the history and the story that's been attached to why someone would do that, not necessarily attached to the moment itself. And they're giving a lot of different examples that seem interesting, but I trust that it's triggering the thought that is required for you to bring to the forefront that sometimes there's things that are triggering you, triggering me, triggering us, that are not necessarily about the moment itself or the occurrence, even though your human mind will find a reason why it's attached to that. But that maybe it's just connected to a history and a past based on what you've been told the emotion should be with such a circumstance.